this computer. Beautiful. All right, we are recording. We're live. It's 3:02, and we're ready to get this party started. So welcome, everybody, to the call. My name is Adrian. I am the CEO and founder of Groundhogg. We help small businesses launch their funnel, grow their list, and scale their business using proven marketing automation tools for WordPress. And today I am joined by a colleague and I like to consider a friend. His name is Ryan Moore. He's the president of Uncanny Owl, and they have nothing short of one of the craziest, coolest plugins that I've ever seen. It's called UnCanny Automator, and it pretty much will allow you to automate your entire business with simple recipes and actions and hooks and crazy stuff, all with no code, and it's just amazing. And I've been playing around with it, and I'm just like super stoked to have them on the call and to talk about their new Groundhogg integration and all the other integrations that they can have that can simplify you automating your business. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass it right over to Ryan, and he can introduce himself and tell us a little bit about Uncanny Automator.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So as Adrian mentioned, I'm Ryan Moore. I'm one of the co-founders of Uncanny Owl. I'll talk more about the company in a couple of minutes. Initially, I just wanted to walk through some of what we'll be covering today, just to set expectations and get a feel to make sure that everyone is aware of what's going to be covered. So let me just switch over and I'll jump right in. So what we're focused on today is automation, and specifically automation that's tied in some way to WordPress. It might be just plugins talking to each other, it might be external apps, it might be different WordPress sites, but the idea is that we're connecting things together. So I'm sure a lot of the people on the call are familiar with integration plugins like, say, LearnDash, for example, which is a plugin we work a lot with. They would have an integration with WooCommerce so that you could sell courses through WooCommerce. So these plugins out there that connect one thing to another thing, but typically they just do that one function. They connect two things together. Even when you're looking at something like Zapier, they would still just connect two things together, maybe a couple of things, but there wouldn't be a lot of complexity to how the integrations work. So we're looking at how to make things talk to each other. We're also taking a look at how to avoid custom development by looking at no-code solutions. So if you wanted to connect some things or make something happen that there's not an existing plugin for, normally you would look at custom development. But what we do with Automator is instead we have hundreds of what we call triggers and actions available so that you can kind of build things in a way that makes sense for you and your site. We're also going to take a look at how to make it easier for administrators to handle routine activities. So things that you tend to do over and over again, or just consistently in different situations, how we can automate those so you're not spending so much time looking at those mundane tasks. And then we're looking at also how to personalize user experiences. So when we can start to automate things and make things happen on your site or by email or on other sites based on activity on your site, then you can deliver a much more personalized experience. So the user can feel like you're looking at what they've done and who they are and what they can accomplish. And you're using that to drive what they experience with the site and elsewhere. So that's kind of how we're looking at things with Automator today, and the connection with Groundhogg, how we can improve user experience, cut admin time, and make things easier using automation. Okay, so let me jump then into the next slide, and we'll talk a bit about exactly what we're going to learn. So I've kind of talked about this already a bit, but we're looking at how to automate almost anything in WordPress or that's connected to WordPress. So there are some dependencies on WordPress, but beyond that, there's a lot of flexibility. We're also looking at how to take automations in Groundhogg to the next level. So what else you can do with them by allowing more complex recipes or incorporating more integrations into the mix. What else you can do with Automator that maybe you couldn't normally. Again, just based on as an alternative to custom development and some of the other integration tools or buying multiple plugins, what you can do with Groundhogg and Automator that would allow you to save a lot of admin time and expense of all these plugins and custom development. And then again, how to improve user engagement with automation. So what we can do around user behaviors to make the experience more personalized. All right, so now I'm going to talk quickly just about Uncanny Automator. And okay, so there's a question here too, which is interesting. It's the name of my sister-in-law. How do the capabilities of Automator compare to WP Fusion? So we get this question a lot, and I'll just jump into it and then come back to my slides. The big difference is that WP Fusion has CRM dependencies. So it also has membership capabilities. But what it's doing is it's routing everything through a CRM. So you do have to have one in place, and it's going to handle the automations for you. It doesn't connect necessarily plugins together. It handles everything through tags and in some cases through webhooks. Whereas with Automator, and we'll talk more about it in a few minutes, it's more about connecting plugins together. So there are a lot more plugin integrations, like how you connect directly. And it doesn't have the CRM dependency. Everything happens inside WordPress or with external apps that you define. So it's different in that sense, that it doesn't have the CRM basis. Okay, so back to talking about Uncanny Owl. We are Toronto-based, just like Groundhogg. We've been around for 7 years now, primarily in the e-learning space. And historically, we worked a lot with LearnDash and built a lot of products and services around the LearnDash community. So right now we have 2 free plugins. One of them is Automator. One of the paid ones is Automator Pro. There are versions that I'll talk through. And we also have 6 LearnDash plugins then. So our plugins are on somewhere around 25,000 sites. And the paid plugins on a significant number of that as well. Primarily, we are known in the LearnDash space. Automator is our first venture outside of LearnDash, and it's been kind of an interesting and good experience connecting to the wider WordPress community. We are also the creators of Uncanny Automator. So again, just reinforcing, if you do have additional questions, so this one I'm going to hold. There's a question right now from Richard about the free version needing to be activated. I'll talk more about the differences, but yes, there is a dependency. So if you have the free version, you would need to keep that installed if you also use Pro. Okay, so what is Uncanny Automator then? It is a WordPress plugin, first of all, and it's an integration tool. And if you're familiar with tools like Zapier or Integromat, it's much like those. It connects different things together. It helps one system talk to another system. So what it does then is we build a structure that we call recipes. It's kind of a common term with integration tools. And when something happens, or when many things happen, then we can make other things happen. So if somebody clicks a link, then we can take them to a page or make something else happen. And it's a very simplified example, but basically it's about creating these recipes with triggers and actions so that we can define, like, when a set of behaviors happen that are user driven or else they're based on other app activity, then we can control what else happens. Right now, Automator connects to over 40 plugins, and through webhooks and Zapier support and things like that, then we can connect to thousands of apps. And we also have a system for having one WordPress site talk to other WordPress sites, so they can connect together, pass data, create users, enroll people in courses, do things of that nature. So it's really just about connecting as much as possible together into flexible recipes.
What I have a question that I'd like you to answer now, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Why would someone actually want to connect to WordPress sites together? Why would that be super useful? Can you give us a use case?
That one comes up a lot. Again, like a lot of our users are in the LearnDash community doing a lot with e-learning. A very popular one there is that they sell on one website course access to a dedicated LMS site. So an example would be, say you're selling your courses on a marketing site, the primary domain, or it's on Shopify or Cartflows or something like that.
Using WooCommerce or EDD or something.
Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. As long as, again, we can pass data from pretty much anything. But let's say it is a WordPress site. So let's say it's a primary marketing WordPress site with WooCommerce installed. Then what we can do is we can pass the data from WooCommerce over to the LMS site. So let's say it's lms.domain.com or something. So it's a subdomain where the learning activities take place. It's another WordPress install. So we can pass data over to create the user, enroll the user in courses, set up groups, that kind of stuff. So instead of users being in a situation where they have to have tons of plugins and lots of functionality on a single WordPress install, you could potentially divide it up, which tends to be pretty popular with learning sites, where you have like one e-commerce site and you have a different site where you have the heavier content that is all signed in users, or a membership site, or really anything like that where there are signed in users, where you can handle it distinctly from where you sell, where performance is really key. So where you have to.
I know
Mhm.
for a fact that there are a ton of Buddy Boss people on this call.
Okay.
Would you be able to do kind of like a similar thing where you have a marketing site and you have like your community and you have an integrated like Buddy Boss and stuff like that?
Yeah, you can definitely do that.
Absolutely.
And it's
Awesome.
that's a popular one. We have a couple of clients where they have, for example, one theme, say Astra or something, running on the primary marketing site that's very lean. And then the social community and the learning site is using Buddy Boss, which tends to be a bit more heavy. So they can kind of keep the properties separate. Still kind
That's
of co-branded, but yeah.
Thank you for
Anyway,
answering that. There are a couple questions popping up, and I think what we'll
sure.
do is we're gonna hold those for now. So sit tight, Francis, and sit tight, Richard. We do have you do have a few demos prepared. So let's go ahead and actually see what it looks like, what it does, how's it work, and exactly how easy it is to create these recipes and run this automation.
Yeah,
No
definitely.
code.
Yes, so I'm going to switch over because the best way to understand it and kind of understand the utility is to take a look at how we would actually build a recipe. So let me quickly do that. So recipes are all created in the admin area, so the admin dashboard as an administrator. And administrators can go in here and they can click on add a new recipe. And when they do that, they land on a page where they would then define what kind of recipe it's in. So if anyone on the call has used the free version of Automator, this might look a little different because one of the things that the pro version adds is support for anonymous recipes. And that means that we can trigger recipes and activity without knowing who the user is when we start it. So for this simple example, I'm just going to use a very straightforward logged in activity. So let's say that I'm going to click on that, set it up as a logged in recipe. And what it's going to show me now is my available triggers and actions. So this isn't the full list. This is just based on what Automator detects is installed. And the actions that would be available would depend on what triggers we choose. It's going to change based on that. So let me just walk through the different parts that are on the screen now just to understand or to better explain how a recipe is set up and what it would do. So the first thing we want to do is we want to name it. So we want to give it a pretty straightforward name. I'm just going to call this like a product sale, just to make it easily identifiable. The triggers section here, this is where I define what needs to happen first before I run the things down here automatically. So it could be one thing, it could be multiple things. What I'm going to do in this example is I'm going to have a user buy a product and add a tag in Groundhogg, which of course is easy. You can already do it with Groundhogg, but I'll just walk through kind of that simple example and then extend it to show you kind of how it goes from there. So I'm building that part of the recipe first where I choose the triggers and actions. Over here, I'm defining how many times it can run. So there are situations where maybe you want to send an email every time somebody completes a topic in, I don't know, Lifter LMS or Tutor LMS or something like that. So you don't just want it to run once, you want it to run every time someone does that. So this is, you can make it unlimited, you can make it a certain number, but that's where you'd kind of define that. So let's suppose right now though that I'm going back, I'm just creating this simple recipe. So I'm saying, okay, the trigger is going to be someone making a purchase. So I'm going to say that the trigger is someone purchasing a product. And then I would define, okay, which product? It could be any product. It could be a specific product. I'm just going to use this one for the example, and then I'll save that. And maybe you only want it to run after somebody's bought a product 3 times. Maybe there's a special condition, like if you make 3 purchases of a points product, then it unlocks a course or a live event or something like that. But anyway, let's go through that. So it's going to be simple for now, just the single trigger. Someone buys this product, and then we define what happens. And then we're going to say, okay, in Groundhogg, then I want to add a tag to the user. So I'm going to define that, and then it's going to pull in the list of tags that are set up in Groundhogg, and I can say, okay, I want this person to be an attendee or tagged as an attendee. So I go ahead and do that, and that's it. I just switched it to live, and I turn all of these things onto live. So I have to turn on the trigger to live, the action to live, and the recipe itself to live. And now what's going to happen once I've done that is that every time a user buys this product, the first time they buy it, we're going to add that tag. And that's kind of a very, very simplified example of a very basic recipe. But of course, that one's not too useful, and it doesn't really show the power of Automator. So I'm going to create a new one. Like in this one, it's limited by what's going to happen to the user now. Like what else should we do with the user? Or this is a logged in recipe. So what happens if the guest checkout is turned on in WooCommerce and you don't have user information? So like, how do we map to that? How do we create a user? How do we set up what we need to so that they can do what they want? So I'm going to create a second recipe now, and I'll just walk through a more complex example. Starting with that idea too, that we're still purchasing a product, but there's a little bit more we can do to it. So this time I'm going to make it anonymous. This means that, again, we don't necessarily know who the user is, or we can't map to a user at the start of the recipe. So once again, I'm going to just make the trigger a product purchase. So this would work with signed-in users as well as anonymous users. And in this case, I'm going to make it the same product. So when this happens now, we have to define what's going to happen. Like, do we run this against an existing user? Could we be creating a new user? Do we want to support that? So in this case, yes, we want to create a new user when they purchase by guest checkout. So things get interesting here. This is where we can define, okay, if we're creating a user here, then let's find out something about them, and let's create the user in WordPress and do everything we need to with them. So when we're capturing information in this WooCommerce purchase, we have some order information that we can use elsewhere in the recipes. So right here, if we want to define first name, then we have what are called tokens. So I clicked on the asterisk over on the right side, and what that does is gives me access to some variables, both some common ones as well as data that we can get from the trigger, in this case, the purchase. So what I can do here is I can scroll through here, and I can see all of the information that we can access from that purchase. So there's a lot. WooCommerce collects a lot of data. So in this case, what I'm looking for is the user's first name. And then here I want to put in the last name. So again, we're taking information from the order so that we know how to create the user around it while still allowing guest checkout in WooCommerce. And not that this is a typical example with sites where you'd want to grant access to multiple things, but there are some situations where maybe you want to make it anonymous. Like physical product sales, you don't need to create an account, so you'd only have the forced user creation for certain product type purchases. So back to this one, I'm just going to add in the billing email. The username, WooCommerce wouldn't normally catch that or have a field that we could use for that, so I'm just going to use the billing email again. We can, again, combine first name, last name if we want to using these tokens. So I'll just paste those in here. This is kind of a longer example, but I just wanted to walk through kind of how we would actually set this up and how it would create the user as we would want them to. And sorry, I shouldn't have used that role. We'll just make them a customer when we create them. We'll log them in. And if the user already exists, so this is a logged in user maybe, or user with an account, then we'll just map it to that user. So if they do exist, we use email address to be able to map them so that we can still support guest checkout. And if the user exists, we can still add this purchase to their account. So let's go ahead and map it to email address. And again, this is just the first part of the action. So now we want to go through the tagging again. So just kind of to walk through that again, we're going to add that tag, but we still want to show what else you can do with it. So let's say we also want to add this user to a LearnDash group. So maybe this user bought a product that has to do multiple things, like maybe it's event access, maybe it's access to courses, maybe it's Zoom webinar, whatever. We can kind of connect all those together. So in this case, we're just going to add the user to a group to grant them access to a number of courses. So for this one, I'm just going to say they're part of this group. and then I can keep going. And in this case, because we're creating a user, we're going to want to send them some access information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to send an email, and it's the same kind of situation. Like when we send emails, we can use a lot of those tokens. So we can define, okay, who's the sender, who's the receiver. In this case, we default to the administrator as the sender and the recipient as the user's email address. Again, this is going back to billing email. And we can define the subject. So I'm just going to say welcome. And we can start including variables down here. So we can use the tokens again. And in here, then I can pull down the first name and use that. And I can say your username is, and then I can populate that because we've created them. And I'll choose the email address, and then we can just, instead of sending them a password in plain text, there are links where we can actually click on a link. It gives you access to the site, it signs you in. Also where you can click on a link and it takes you right to the set password page. So you don't have to do the email confirmation. It will just take you there where you set a new password. So I can say, and then actually, sorry, that's a common one. So I will use the reset URL, and then I would save that. And then I can do all these other things too. Like I don't want to spend too much time on this one specific example, but these are all the things I can connect to. So if I want to register the user in a live event too, then I can do that. I can just keep adding actions, whatever is appropriate to this particular recipe. And all of these things then, they happen when that purchase is made for that product. So when they buy the product, they're going to get tagged, they're going to get added to a group, they're going to get sent an email, they're going to RSVP to this live event, and any of these other things that we want to do too. We could also connect to Zapier and send the data. There was a question here about what kind of data you can pass. So when you're working with webhooks, all of the data would be text-based. So you can set up, I'll show you actually, let me go into this one. So if we were using Zapier in an external app, then we just need the URL that we're sending data to, how we're sending the data. And then in here, we can use all those variables again. We can define like what the key should be. So something like first name, last name, email address, things like that. So you can also test it and you can add headers and things like that. So that's how you would pass data, but it is limited to text values that are set up in here. So I'm going to get to the questions in a second, but so that's how it would work. Like I can add more conditions, like I could add more triggers. Oh no, sorry. If it was a logged in recipe, I could add more triggers, but I could add as many actions as I want and they'd all happen automatically as soon as that purchase is made.
That's all pretty cool. And I think what we should do is we should break it up, because that's like information overload right there.
It's a lot.
It's a lot because it does so much and it's a lot. So let's take a little bit of break. And there's a few questions. Why don't we just take care of those and then we can keep going on. So okay. Question number one is, does the free version need to be activated for the pro version to work, or does the pro version work independently?
Right. So that one I addressed. The free version is required if you're using Pro. The Pro has dependencies on some of the frameworks that are in the free version. Okay.
So is Automator compatible with WPML, so the multilingual plugin?
Yeah. We don't have support for WPML. I don't have any feedback on that. We haven't tested it, and I haven't heard from users that are using WPML. On the one hand, it's good that we haven't heard of it breaking anything, but on the other, we don't have full support. And for something like sending emails, like right now, the situation would be that either you have products, for example, or just anything in different languages that you would need different recipes for them with different emails.
So Ellen Martin is asking, in the WooCommerce create user after guest checkout, does it also connect the WooCommerce order to the new user?
Yes, it would.
Yes, it would. That's awesome. So thank you, Ellen. Anonymous attendee asks, can Automator auto-create tags in Groundhogg based on a custom post, for example? So I guess that'd mean, can it create the tag and then attach it to a contact?
It can't create tags
yet.
No, in most cases, like for anything where we're pulling down lists, it would be things that already exist. There are a few things we can create. So like we can create new user meta, we can create posts, we can do things like create groups in sub plugins. But Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Um,
So it can't create
there's a
tags, but it
lot
can
still.
assign tags.
Yeah, there's many things that we just can't create where we just pull down lists. Like we can't create courses or something either. We would just pull down a list of courses.
Okay.
So it kind of depends on the post type and what we're trying to do, but assume generally that creating new content that's relied on by other plugins generally wouldn't be supported.
I see a few more questions coming in, but I think what we're going to do is we're going to hold those to the next Q&A period. So why don't we continue on and plow forward and just continue to show how incredible Automator is.
Okay, so I'm just looking at some of the other questions, Adrian. I do want to deal with a couple that were kind of raised. So let me just go into, because we want to focus too on some of the integration with Groundhog. So let me just go back to another one. Let's say for this one, I want to use a Groundhog trigger. So let's say a user is tagged with something. So they have some kind of tag assigned. So right now there was some questions that I saw around maybe around the pro labeling for some of these things. Where you're seeing pro in Automator means that it requires the use of the pro plugin. So basically the premium plugin for Automator. So it means either triggers or actions for those particular plugins are only supported in the pro version. And when you go into one of them too, like let me just add this one. So I'll just name that very quickly. So let's say that this one's initiated by the tag being added, and I should have shown you in there. Let me just add another trigger and then you can see it. So when I go back in, where it has these pro labels, that just identifies that there is a dependency on a pro plugin being installed. So where you don't see that, for example, like if I go into LearnDash, then we've got a ton of stuff where there's no pro. So that means it would be supported in the free version. It's only when you get down here that you start to see some of the pro ones. So anyway, that's what that identifier is for. It does not, in this case, have anything to do on the Groundhog side. So I'm using for this demo the free version of Groundhog to pull in the tags and to look for tags, remove tags, things like that. It doesn't mean that a pro version or premium version is required for that plugin. Like if we show it in these lists, then that means that we support it and no additional plugins are needed for whatever that integration is. So hopefully that piece makes sense. In terms of, like, I want to talk too about some of the differences because both tools do automations. Where Automator is maybe a bit different, and sorry, let me block that. Where Automators may be a bit different is with the number of plugins and tools it supports, and also the complexity of the recipes. So with this one, for example, let's
This
say
is the
that,
difference between Automator and what?
sorry, Groundhog.
Okay.
So if there's confusion there, because like we had the one for WP Fusion before, and it does come up a lot, and I'll be talking to you about how it's different than Zapier as well. But it is with the number of integrations, the types of triggers and actions we support, and this kind of recipe complexity. So if we did something like this one, like where a tag is added to a user, then we could do something to, like, say the tag is added. So we're looking at a subset of users that maybe you're only in one LearnDash group. So if we said users added to a group, so the condition for this then would be both that they're a member of a specific group and that they've been tagged a certain way in Groundhog. So where we have the multiple conditions. In this example, maybe I'll just walk through what might happen in this scenario. Like, let's say too that we had those three conditions, but those two conditions, we wanted to add a third. So let's say too that we were looking for intervention for a learner that is struggling. So we might look for a learner that is in this group, has this tag applied, and has also performed poorly. So let's say that they failed any quiz. I'm just going to say any quiz here, and they've done it 3 times. So that would just be kind of our benchmark of, okay, this person's having some trouble, we need to intervene. So what we could do then is we could clear their progress from a course. So these are just examples. I won't set it up because I know it takes time. But in terms of actions, like we could do things like clear their progress, enroll them in a remedial course, notify their manager, send them an email, redirect them to a page. There's this redirect down here. So based on the behaviors that happen, we can redirect them somewhere where they can get kind of personalized instructions. We can also pop something up that says, here's what happened, here's what you need to do next, just to make sure that they get the support that they need. We could even like enroll them in one-on-one coaching sessions, maybe with Zoom meetings or something like that. So there are a lot of ways that you can kind of, again, personalize and just connect with the users to make sure that they're getting a good experience and that it's personal to them. They're getting the support they need.
I think a lot of these questions will actually be answered by your upcoming deck. So
yeah, okay.
I think it's a good idea to move on.
Sure, let's move on. And I've gotten pretty deep into Automator now. So maybe I'll switch back here because the next piece that I wanted to talk about was how it's different than Zapier or Zapier or however you want to pronounce it, which is kind of a cloud-based automation and integration tool. So it connects over 2,000 apps together. We get a lot of questions about how it's different. Like first, the biggest difference is where it runs. Zapier is running on the cloud. It's going through AWS. Data is being passed through multiple locations. Uncanny Automator is a plugin. It runs on WordPress sites, and that's it.
So this would be important if you have to comply with like certain GDPR regulations and you can't host data or pass data through third parties. So if you need to have it self-hosted, then you'd want to use Automator versus Zapier.
We see that requirement a lot from European customers in particular, where this allows complete control over the data. So any kind of personal data never leaves the WordPress site unless you're sending it in a webhook, but even then you control where it goes. Whereas when you're using something like these other tools, there's a lot of information that would pass through them that isn't always transparent. It could be in different countries, most of it's US based. So this allows a lot more control. And again, it's really focused on the WordPress side of things, like connecting things together. So there are plugins that might connect one or two plugins together. In the case of Zapier, like they do have a new plugin that connects with I think around 10 plugins, but it's still nowhere close to what we do, and everything's routed through a third-party service. Whereas we're just connecting directly with the plugins. Everything happens within WordPress or through webhooks. It's also open source, so like we do get some developers that are creating their own integrations, have a lot of questions about it. We have documentation for developers. It's pretty open and easy to use. So that's kind of another benefit, that it is flexible. You can make changes to it, you can extend it, and it's open to do whatever you want. With Automator 2, because all the data is stored locally in WordPress sites, there are no per zap costs, or when you're running these automations, there wouldn't be any additional costs. So if you're sending, tens of thousands of notifications or triggering all kinds of different things, there's no cost to that beyond the cost of the plugin itself if you're using the pro version. And of course, with the free version, then there's no cost whatsoever. So that's kind of a brief overview. I want to scan questions too, just in case there's anything related to Zapier before I move on.
I'm looking at it, and I don't think so.
Okay. All right, so they do connect together as well. So if there's a lot you're trying to do in WordPress as well as other apps, then it's not unusual to use both Zapier and Automator. It is an option, there is a dedicated integration, and it's easy to pass data from one to the other. So we can have apps trigger things, like with the anonymous recipes that I talked about. Again, it's kind of complex there, but we can make recipes run when other apps trigger it with webhooks, which is just a way of passing data into the WordPress site. We can collect data from Zapier and have it make things happen in WordPress, like set up users and add posts, change access, change roles, create groups, whatever needs to be done. So anyway, you can use both together. It does work pretty seamlessly there. So I have kind of gone so far with the assumption that a lot of the callers do know what Groundhogg is. But just in case, because I'm seeing some questions from a few people that I know and I don't know about their familiarity with Groundhogg. So just to cover that side of things, maybe Adrian, you could talk just a little bit about Groundhogg and just how it works and potentially how they can work together.
So absolutely. So for those of you who may be coming from Uncanny, I'm technically the host of this, but Ryan was awesome and promoted it. So for anybody who doesn't know what it is exactly that we do, we are also an automation company. However, Ryan Moore and Uncanny Automator are focused on integrating other plugins, while we're our own platform that uses other integrators to integrate with other stuff. So ours would be the source of the data, or otherwise known as the single source of truth. We have the CRM, the contact database, where we store all of the emails. We have marketing automation funnels that run, which are what creates your user journey and your user experience. And then how people interact with Groundhogg is what would actually trigger events in Uncanny Automator that would then trigger other events in other plugins to continue the user experience outside of our own platform. So someone mentioned that they look like competitors, and there is overlap. That's absolutely true. A lot of our integrations can be covered by what Uncanny Automator does, but when it comes to where the data actually comes from in order to make Uncanny Automator work, that's when Groundhogg comes in as that single source of truth. And I'm going to demo a little bit about what that looks like for you right now. I'm going to be super quick because today is supposed to be about Ryan. So I have just a simple site set up right now. So go ahead and share screen. There we go. Boom. So right now, I am logged into WordPress. Like Uncanny Automator, Groundhogg is a completely self-hosted WordPress plugin, meaning all of your data is in WordPress. So if you have to be compliant with GDPR or any of the European country regulations, you can host Groundhogg's data wherever you want without having it sent to a third-party service, which is super important. So we have the CRM, which just contact records right in the dashboard. I have a test contact record here. I can open it up. I can see all of this particular contact's activity, how they interact with specific emails, what funnels they were a part of, what products they purchased. In the payments area, they have a contact file box. We were talking a lot about tags. I can see how we segment them into different groups of contacts. I can then use this information in order to create things like broadcast emails. So if I have an email already, let's find out. I don't. So let's just go ahead and add one. So I'll create a new email. My custom, or my email, well, let's just call it because I want to get through this. And subject line. We'll go ahead and create that. And we'll mark that as ready. We can then, after creating an email, we also have a drag and drop version of this editor. This is just the plain text editor, which I actually prefer. But we do have a drag and drop one if you prefer like the MailChimp style of creating emails. So once we've done and created our email, we can go ahead and we can create a broadcast, and then we can send this as an email blast to our entire contact list on our site. We have our automation. So while Ryan and Uncanny have automation recipes, we have funnels. And funnels are basically how you get someone from point A to point B through marketing automation, either through like utilizing webhooks or timers and emails. And basically this allows you to create a customer journey in order to get someone to either connect with you, to buy something, or to engage with your content. One of our most popular funnels, especially for the learning community and for the Buddy Boss community and the community builders, is our login abandonment funnel. Now, our login abandonment funnel is a really, really simple recipe here. And what it does is it will send out timed email reminders after a certain amount of time when someone logs in. So if someone logs into your site and then they haven't re-logged in within 7 days, then what we're going to do is we're actually going to send them an email that asks them if everything is okay. And that will send them the reply. They'll say, hey, first, well, since you've logged in last, is everything okay? Or it's been a while since you've logged in last, is everything okay? We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. So if you're suffering from login abandonment, or you have a very low engagement rate of people not continuing to engage with your stuff, email notifications like this, and we also support SMS notifications, are an easy way in order to continue the conversation with customers that would either cancel or abandon outright and never continue to engage with your content, and that's bad for business. So that is a really critical way in which Uncanny Automator and Groundhogg differ, is that we're really focused on creating entire user journeys and customer journeys and experiences, while things that happen within the funnel here then can trigger Uncanny Automator to do cool things in other plugins, like add a tag here. So once a tag is added, So I can go ahead and add a tag at this point in the funnel and say add to learn dash course, or add to learn bada. I should say add to learn dash. That would then trigger Uncanny Automator to add that person to learn dash from this point in the funnel, which is just super cool. So those are the key differences. There's lots more that I could dive into with Groundhog and a lot of other ways that you can use this. But I'm going to give up the screen and give it back to Ryan. Hopefully that clarifies a little bit about the core differences between Uncanny. To sum up, it's all about where your data is actually coming from. So what is your single source of truth? In this case, it would be the CRM component within Groundhog, and the types of automation that we serve. Groundhog is focused on creating entire customer journeys that can span several days, weeks, years, if not, or months, if not years. And then what happens within those customer journeys are what tells Uncanny Automator, along with other plugins, what to do and where to send the data and what other actions to accomplish. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's pass it back over to Ryan.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. So I'm just going to share my screen again. I was going to walk through some other demos, but I think it's maybe better if we skip those. There are a lot of questions and I want to make sure that I address them. So here I just wanted to kind of walk through some of the plugins and tools that we support. So on the WordPress side, the plugins, it's around 45 right now. And we added 5 new ones yesterday. So it's getting pretty big. And a lot of these, for example, wouldn't be supported by Groundhog. It would be very, very much effort. And in some cases, it would be a small audience for some of these things. And also, again, we're connecting multiple things together. So some of the recent additions, things like Uncanny codes, we're connecting with more of our plugins. So basically now with that addition, we can make code redemption do anything. Like it could add a tag to a user in Groundhog by entering a code, or it could auto-complete a course or register somebody in like a Zoom webinar. With groups too, we have a lot of flexibility now on what we can do with LearnDash and other plugins. So we keep adding a lot more. The capabilities are pretty significant, and most of the plugins or the integrations that I'm listing do have anywhere between 5 and 20 triggers and actions. So I want to walk through some of the questions though, just to make sure that everything's addressed. So Adrian, I'm just going to start from the top then. So there were a few questions I saw related to sending data between sites, between subdomains potentially, between even WordPress and non-WordPress resources. So in all cases, the webhook system would be a lot like what I showed for Zapier. You would define what data you're sending, how to populate it for the user, what method to send it. In cases too, like the screen that I have up right now, it's showing WP webhooks. Like that's really where the power of the integrations come in. Like if you're using some enterprise systems that require certain authentication methods for the webhooks, then this is where we could tie into WP webhooks to do things that neither Groundhog nor Automator natively could support, where we can trigger these things and send more data and connect with more systems that would otherwise be impossible. So again, just for those connections, it does rely on webhooks. For situations where you're sending data from one WordPress site to another WordPress site, it would absolutely require Automator installed on both sites. So the primary site that's basically the trigger would have a recipe where the trigger is whatever the activity is, and the act be sending webhook data. And then it would send it to the other site where the trigger then would be the incoming webhook. That's what would perform the actions. So to answer the questions around that, yes, Automator would be required for any sites that are WordPress and connecting together. For external apps, again, they would have to support either incoming or outgoing webhooks, depending on the specific needs for the integration. Let me look at the one from Stacy then. So form-based workflows. Like the model with Automator, and I saw that Ellen had a related question too. The model with Automator is that when something happens, something else immediately happens. Like there is no process where there's an approval or delay or anything like that. So as soon as something is fired, then it runs it. There's no queuing system. so that in some areas does limit it. And of course, we're looking at scheduled actions, and that's right now where the CRM integration, so Groundhogg, WP Fusion, things like that, they do add value because they can create these time-bound automations for some situations that Automator couldn't handle. So for us, like we're not we haven't used Groundhogg as much as some other users here. We do a pretty heavy integration with CRMs though, so we use WP Fusion a lot, where we can kind of do the same thing with Groundhogg with these automations that allow a lot of conditions and just extend the capabilities of Automator. And in turn, we can extend what they do by providing more complex recipes that they hook into. So hopefully it helped there. Like everything happens immediately. There's no approval workflows because you can't delay things or postpone them. It's all based on conditions. And as soon as the triggers are satisfied, it would run those actions immediately, all of them. In some cases, you can connect recipes together. It starts to get a bit more complex. But generally speaking, like it's just once a recipe is run, that's it, it's done. So I'm going to scroll down then. And take a look at some of the other ones.
I think there's a good one that I think we should cover, and in terms of showing a use case. So Victoria would like to know a specific use case for something using like BuddyBoss, which a lot of people seem to be on board with these days. Is that something that you could demo?
No, I don't have BuddyBoss set up on any test
never mind
environments.
then.
Sorry for any BuddyBoss people here. I know you've provided me test copies and I do have them up, but not with Automator. So in terms of how it would benefit with BuddyBoss, interestingly, we see a lot more integrations lately with BuddyBoss groups and LearnDash groups, as well as the Uncanny groups. So that's one area potentially where, I don't know, say that somebody gets added to a LearnDash group, then we want to add them to a BuddyBoss group too, and we also want to add them to, say, a bbPress forum. So things like that, like there are integrations supported. There are things we're looking at, like when as part of a recipe, one of the actions would be posting to someone's activity feed. There are situations like that. There's not a lot that we do on the BuddyPress side though. Right now it's some pretty simple integrations, but again, we're seeing more BuddyBoss use. So what's there is pretty useful, and we haven't had too many requests for other triggers and actions, but it does help with the community building where we can connect more things into BuddyBoss groups and LearnDash groups and the community functions. I'm just going to go from the bottom now, Adrian, because I'm at the bottom. So the anonymous attendee asked about happy forums. Taking a look at that, not currently supported. For Jonathan, yeah, you could definitely extend the logic, like again, because you can have all these different triggers and
Can
conditions.
you just repeat the question so everybody knows what you're talking
Sure.
about?
Yeah, sorry, absolutely, that's my mistake. So Jonathan asked, can I show how Automator could control the logic and triggers which Groundhogg can then use to send a group of emails? So this would really be a situation though where you're depending on tags. So where we would have a number of triggers that could be anything, and the action would be setting the tag, which so that we could trigger those emails based on a tag being added on the Groundhogg side, but where we have different conditions that maybe Groundhogg couldn't support on the trigger side. So the end result of the recipe would just be setting the tag so that we can hand off to Groundhogg where it could handle all those emails. And then the complexity of the recipe would be on the Automator side where we're setting up multiple triggers. Jonathan also mentioned that the distinction we have in the UI for the free versus pro version is confusing. What I would suggest there is on the website, it's a lot more distinct. So where we have the integration pages, then it would clearly say, like it has a list of all the triggers and actions on the website. So you would see there like the full list, and it would clearly state which one is part of pro and which one's part of free. So yes, in the UI, it's not as straightforward, but if you use that in combination with the website, especially like when you're looking at the plugin itself, then it makes a lot more sense where the distinctions are. For Matt's question then about Easy Webinar and WP Amelia, we don't have integrations with those, but at the same time, like I'm not familiar with them. If they support incoming webhooks, then that's a situation where you could still use Automator and just use the actions as the sending the webhooks. So I would take a look at it from that perspective if we could connect that way through the webhooks.
All right, I think that's all of them.
Okay.
So let's move on.
Okay, excellent. So, and again, I'll keep looking at the questions. So there is a discount code because I know we're getting high on time as well. If you do want to use Automator, for the pro version, there's a 25% off discount
Which
code.
I think is very generous, and it's so generous because I made him come on with something generous.
Yeah. So anyway, it's valid for the first 25 signups. It will. There's currently no time limit on that, so it's just available if you want to use it.
I do imagine that they will go fast.
The free version, it's still worth taking a look at that, just to make sure. Like, have a look at the website, make sure it supports the triggers and actions that fit your website and context. And I would try the free version too, just to get a feel for what I demoed today and how recipes are made. It kind of helps before you jump into the pro version, because the pro version can be a bit intimidating once you start getting into the anonymous triggers and some of the other capabilities, like the magic buttons and links and different ways that you can connect things together. So anyway, hopefully that's useful. Just a quick breakdown then between the two versions, because it has come up a few times. Like, the biggest differences are that it supports more integrations. So things where, actually I'm going to switch back to
Can I
the
interject for a
downside. Yeah,
second?
for sure.
So where do people go to get their 25% off? Like, so what do they have to
Yeah,
do in order to claim that?
sure. So the plugin itself is on automatorplugin.com. And again, it's called Uncanny Automator. So if you just went to, like, there's a link there, there's a button that says Get Automator, and it would give you the option of the free version or the paid versions. And it's just from that pricing page. That's how you would pick it up. You'd land on the cart. You can enter the discount code there. So again, in terms of the pro versions, there's some advanced functions, like some of the things we integrate with natively do require API access. So the tabs you see on this page, these are the types of things that Pro would require. So if you want to trigger text messages, then you would have to go in here and set up Twilio using the Pro version. Same thing with, like, if you're using Zoom webinars or GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, things like that. These are kind of what you'd see in the Pro version. So there's a lot more triggers and actions, more integrations. It supports the anonymous recipes, so where we can trigger things without knowing who the user is and then create the user as part of the recipe. The magic links and buttons. So basically we can trigger any recipe based on a button click, link click, anything like that. So somebody could click on a button that says reset my course progress if they want to redo something for, like, annual compliance or something. Say there's a course, then click on the button, it would reset their progress, it would enroll them. Anyway, it would take care of all of that. So you can use these types of buttons to trigger anything you want, even like setting tags for yourself, removing tags, like anything on the Groundhogg side. So it's a bit interesting there. And then support is through our help desk. Sasha, that's a good question. The webhooks we
What's the
support.
question?
So the question is, are webhooks supported in the free version? It hasn't come up already. So the way we work it is outgoing webhooks. So webhook actions, where we send data to other sites, that's part of the free version. But incoming webhooks, where we have to take them and then create a user or assign things to a user, that requires the pro version. So that's the distinction there. All right, so that's it on my side. Are there any other questions? There's one from Richard. And anyone else, if you have questions, feel free to type them now. Let me take a look. So this is a question about licensing and multi-site. If you're using multi-site, do the network sites need individual licenses? So for support and updates, yes, each subsite would require a license. That's part of the reason we have the unlimited license, because we did have a few users where they were creating, in some cases, hundreds of network sites. So there is that option if it's required. So next question from Frederick then is about that I talked about integrating BBPress and BuddyPress. Can you confirm that BuddyBoss is also supported? Yes, the BuddyPress triggers and actions would also work in BuddyBoss, but not beyond that. We are looking at adding some additional triggers and actions specific to BuddyBoss, but they're not there at this time. Next question about translation ready. So Previously, we talked about WPML and how we didn't support that, but absolutely the plugin itself is translation ready. So if you're using a plugin, like we normally test against local translate, every string is translatable. And certainly we would support any translation issues.
Okay, so we have about 4 minutes left of the call. We'll take any last minute questions, and it looks like we just got one more. So why don't we take care of that one, and we'll start wrapping up.
Sure. Question from Noam then. So does it affect site speed? Do multiple triggers affect it more? So performance is certainly always a concern with this kind of plugin. We've worked very hard, and as long as you're using the latest versions, then the performance hit on most sites should be negligible. Like we've got it down to 2 calls per page that are extremely light. We have seen some situations with extremely large BuddyPress and GameyPress sites specifically, where there are like huge numbers of records, where there are some slowdowns just because of they call, like when we're pulling down something like the badges or something, or pulling down like lists of things. There are some cases where they just natively pull too much data, where we can't really control it. Like in 99% of cases, there wouldn't be issues, and you would never see any kind of performance hit. It's extremely unusual, but anyway, I just wanted to mention that. So multi-site. So yes. Sasha asked a question about, are all subsites automatically licensed when purchasing the unlimited site license of Automator? Yes, they would be. In most cases still, like if you're not using Automator on all sites, I still wouldn't network activate it. I would keep just the activations to subsites that are using it, but yes. In terms of testing the performance before deploying, like this is where a staging site would come in very handy. So when we're doing kind of load testing or looking at any kind of reports like that, we would work from a staging site where we're testing both with the Automator plugins active and deactivated. We would also take a look at specific plugins activated and deactivated and the recipes themselves. So the best answer to that is just have the A/B comparison tests in staging sites, where you can exclude caching from being a factor, and you're looking at raw performance. Like it's going to be slower than the live site, just because they're, in most cases, staging sites are always slower, but it would give you a representation of the, like what kind of hit it would have. Like again, in most cases, it would not be perceptible. It would be fraction of a second, any kind of hit. The anomaly being some very big sites we've seen. But even then, we've got performance down where it's still very, like way under half a second kind of thing. And that's by far the exception.
Okay, so there is one last question from Stacy Moore. Let's answer that, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Sure. So the caching considerations, nothing, like everything's on the back end with Automator. We haven't seen any cases where we're running into issues with transients or cookies or cache data that would conflict with Automator functions. So I'm trying to think of any tickets I've seen, and there just haven't been related to caching where we ruled it, like narrowed it down to caching. So I can't see any problems related to caching that you wouldn't normally already take, like in terms of uncaching things like login page, password reset, pages people would hit where there's dynamic content where you have to adjust. So no, I don't think there's any concern there. Localizations, Spanish. So there's a question about any localizations available that are already integrated in like German. No, we've got English, Spanish, Argentinian Spanish, and that's it.
Okay. All right. Well, here we are at the very end. As a reminder to everybody, the current discount code, which is very generous and provided by Ryan to get 25% off your Uncanny Automator license, is on the screen now. It's just all caps Groundhogg, one word, and it's valid for the first 25 people who make it to his site first and get to use it. After that, I'm sorry, you're just out of luck. You can use the free version of Uncanny Automator or the Automator plugin from the WordPress.org repository to get started if you're not ready to commit today. So for anybody who has any additional questions about Automator, you can reach out to the both of us in a variety of different ways. So Ryan, what is the best what is the best way for people to get in touch with you and find out more about what you do, what you're up to, and how to get support?
Sure. So anything related to Automator, the best way to reach out is through that email address. So support@automatorplugin.com. It goes to our help desk. We have a lot of tracking. We'll make sure that it's taken care of. The website's listed there too. And those are the best ways to find us. If questions are about LearnDash specifically, then certainly you can visit UncannyOwl.com, and we can handle things there through the contact forms.
So for anyone who has any questions about Groundhogg and what exactly it is that we do and how we can help you launch your funnel, grow your list, and scale your business and significantly lower your monthly CRM bill, you can get to us at groundhogg with 2gs.io, or you can reach out to us via our multitude of social channels, as well as info@groundhogg.io via email. I want to thank everybody for taking the hour out of their day today to spend it with us. It was pretty heavy on technology, and that's awesome. All of us WordPress geeks just love technology so much. I know there's other things that you could have been doing today. So again, just thank you for spending with us. I hope that you found what we discussed on this session extremely valuable and useful. And I hope that the both of us were able to help you solve a couple of roadblocks that you currently have going on in your business. The replay of this session will be made available. It's currently on the Groundhogg WP Facebook page on Facebook, and it will also be posted to YouTube after editing and the recording renders and all of that good stuff. So thank you to everyone for coming, and everyone have a wonderful rest of your week. We'll see you all later.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everyone.